There is a quiet terror that arises within the psyche of the sensitive, the empath, the one who has not merely walked through the world but absorbed it. You sit in a room and feel a sudden sorrow, though no one has spoken. You walk beside a friend, and before a word is uttered, you feel the burden that bends their back. And yet when the night descends and you are alone with yourself, you begin to wonder, was that mine? Or was I merely the vessel of another soul's forgotten grief? The truth is not easy, and the psyche does not yield its secrets lightly. But if you are to understand the strange possession of emotion, you feel we must begin not with sentiment, but with shadow. You see, to be human is not simply to be oneself, it is to be many selves. The ego likes to believe in its singularity, its autonomy, but underneath this illusion lies a great underworld of psychic inheritance, an ancestral lake of symbols, fears, joys, and traumas, which we call the collective unconscious. And it is there that the empath's sensitivity becomes both a gift and a curse. For when you have not yet learned where your psychic skin ends and the world's begins, you become open to the projections and shadows of the collective field. You become a walking sponge for the archetypal unrest that others refuse to feel. But let me be clear, this is not compassion, this is unconscious absorption, this is emotional possession. I recall a dream once shared by a woman who was tormented by these very feelings. In the dream, she stood in a cathedral filled with statues. Each statue wept silently, though their faces were serene. She went to touch one, and as her hand made contact, the sorrow flowed into her. One by one, she touched them all until her body became heavy, bloated with grief that did not belong to her life. And then, in a sudden twist, she saw her reflection in the cathedral glass. Her own face had turned to stone. This is the fate of the empath who does not individuate. They turn into the very repository of the world's pain, petrified by it, frozen by sorrow that is not theirs to carry. For you must understand, empathy without boundaries is not virtue. It is violation of the soul's natural order. It is a secret contract that says, I will carry your darkness so you do not have to. But this contract is signed in unconscious ink, and the price is always paid in suffering. We live in an era obsessed with healing, with light, with emotional availability. And yet the deepest truths lie not in exposure, but in discernment. The emotionally porous are not always evolved. They are often enmeshed in ancient trauma patterns forged long before memory, where love meant self-erasure and safety meant absorbing the danger so others could breathe. This is not divine sensitivity. This is the survival instinct of the wounded child who learned to read a room before learning to read themselves. Why do you feel emotions that aren't yours? Because the psyche, when unguarded and undefined, becomes a playground for archetypes seeking hosts. And the most common archetypes that infiltrate the empath are the victim, the savior, and the martyr. These ancient forms carry with them vast emotional landscapes, pain, guilt, longing, sacrifice. And when we unconsciously align with them, we become channels for the energies they embody. But archetypes do not ask permission. They inhabit, they possess. The empath is particularly susceptible because they often confuse resonance with ownership. They feel the sorrow of another and assume, this is mine to fix. They feel anger in the air and believe, this is my rage to soothe. But what they have missed is the sacred boundary between attunement and enmeshment. To feel another's pain is human. To carry it as if it were your own is psychic confusion. This confusion stems from a lack of psychic individuation. The process by which we become whole within ourselves, recognizing and integrating our own shadow, our own pain, our own complexity. When this process is incomplete, we become magnets for the unconscious material of others. We become the unconscious of the collective, walking around as mirrors, screens, or worse, emotional scapegoats. It is not merely that you are sensitive. It is that you are unshielded in the archetypal field. I once knew a man who worked as a therapist. deeply empathic, revered by his clients. Yet behind closed doors he would collapse into mysterious depressions that he could not explain. The more he healed others, the more broken he became. He believed this was the price of love, but in reality he was absorbing what others could not face. He was not guiding them to their healing, he was wearing their shadow like a cloak, and this cloak over time became his identity. The terrifying truth is this: if you do not recognize the emotions that are not yours, they will become your personality. You will mistake possession for passion, projection for purpose, and you will live a life not of selfhood, but of haunting. To recover your center, you must begin with the sacred act of psychic discernment. Not every emotion that enters your field is a message. Not every vibration is meant for you to translate. The empath must become a mystic warrior, attuned, yet shielded, feeling, yet discerning. You must learn to stand at the threshold between worlds and say, this pain is not mine, this sorrow is not mine. This rage is not mine to baptize with my nervous system. This requires you to confront the secret pleasure of possession, the egoic seduction of being needed, of being the one who understands, of being the emotional lighthouse for the lost. For too often, we wrap our self-worth in the suffering of others. We define ourselves by how much we can feel, rather than by how deeply we can root. The empath is not born, they are shaped. Often in homes where emotion was currency, where being hyper-attuned was necessary for survival. The child who could sense their parents' unspoken rage or sorrow learned to survive not by feeling themselves, but by becoming the emotional barometer of the room. And in doing so, they fused empathy with identity. This fusion, unbroken in adulthood, becomes the curse of the empath to feel everything and yet remain unknown even to themselves. And so, if you find yourself constantly overwhelmed, carrying grief that does not align with your story, ask yourself, who am I being for others that I have never dared to be for myself? Do not rush to cleanse. Do not rush to meditate away the feeling. Instead, become curious. Who does this emotion serve? What archetype have I become? What secret agreement have I made with the unconscious of this person, this room, this lineage? There is no liberation without inquiry. There is no clarity without shadow work. The empath who does not meet their own darkness will become a vessel for the world's chaos. The empath who does not claim their own rage will absorb the rage of others. The empath who does not grieve their own past will weep for strangers in dreams they do not understand. And so I ask you, are you carrying what is not yours because you love, or because you do not yet know who you are without it? If you are to be free from the haunting flood of foreign emotions, you must return to the source, the wound that taught you to make yourself available to psychic invasion. Most often this wound is ancient. It belongs not only to your childhood, but to your ancestry, your soul lineage, your archetypal inheritance. You see, there are emotions that do not begin in the now. They echo from generations past, grief unwept, rage, unspoken joy, uncelebrated. If your great-grandmother carried shame and silence, and your grandfather drank to drown terror, and your mother smiled through quiet agony, then you, the empathic inheritor, will carry the ache of their unlived truth. This is ancestral possession masquerading as empathy. The modern empathic soul is often the unconscious container for what the family system refused to digest. Not because they are chosen, but because they are open. Open psychically, open emotionally, open energetically. But this openness without wisdom leads to soul leakage. You cry tears you never earned, you hold guilt you never caused. You feel terror in your bones that does not fit your life, and so you assume it must be your weakness. But it is not your flaw, it is your assignment. Not to carry it, but to recognize it, name it, and transmute it. Transmutation is not the act of absorbing emotion. It is the act of seeing it for what it is, pattern, energy, trauma, archetype, without making it your identity. You must learn to feel without fusing. This is why dream work becomes essential. Dreams are the theater of the unconscious where your soul speaks in the symbolic language of archetypes. When you dream of drowning, of shadows chasing you, of nameless children crying, you are witnessing the movements of the psychic field, yours and the collective's. You must learn to ask, whose fear is this? Whose child is crying in my dream? What unspoken memory is visiting me in symbols? You see, when we do not process these energies consciously, they remain lodged in the body and psyche, manifesting as anxiety, depression, psychosomatic pain. The body becomes the last messenger of what the soul cannot contain. In the depths of your unconscious lies a feminine figure, the anima, or a masculine one, the animus, depending on your psychic constitution. They are the bridge to your inner world, the gatekeepers of your emotional life. But if you have not yet made them conscious, they too become projected onto partners, mentors, idols, or even strangers on the street. This projection is another cause of emotional possession. Let me be clear, when your anima is unconscious, you may fall in love with sadness that is not yours. You may chase lovers who suffer deeply and wonder why their pain feels like your responsibility. But in truth, you are not loving them. You are chasing your own unloved inner feminine, the part of you that feels too much, weeps in silence, yearns to be held. And the same is true for the animus. You may find yourself obsessed with anger, power, control, because your unconscious masculine is still lost in the battlefield of your soul. And so the emotions of others stick to you, not because you are compassionate, but because you are fragmented. Individuation demands integration. You must bring home the anima, not search for her in the brokenness of others. You must reconcile with the animus, not confuse his fury with someone else's fire. Only then will your energetic field become defined, not rigid, but sovereign. You will no longer absorb what does not belong to you. You will feel but not drown. You will care but not collapse. There is a strange pleasure in being overwhelmed by other people's feelings. Do not deny this. For some, it is the only way they know how to feel alive. To carry emotional intensity is to feel necessary, special, spiritual. It becomes the identity of the empath. And yet this is merely a false self, constructed around emotional enmeshment. When this false self begins to crack through burnout, relationship breakdown, or spiritual crisis, many empaths feel as though they are dying. But it is not death, it is liberation. You were never meant to be a container for other people's unprocessed pain. You were meant to become a vessel of conscious compassion, not the kind that absorbs, but the kind that witnesses. Not the kind that saves, but the kind that awakens. When Christ spoke of carrying the burdens of others, he did not mean psychic fusion. He meant conscious choice. He meant walking beside, not walking inside. This is the difference between Christ consciousness and codependent spirituality. You must ask yourself, what do I fear will happen if I stop absorbing their feelings? Will they fall apart? Will they leave? Will I become useless? Will I feel empty? And if you feel empty, then you must meet the truth. Your identity was built on possession. This is a painful truth, but a freeing one. The psyche seeks wholeness, not performance. You cannot serve others by drowning in their despair. That is not love, that is fusion. And fusion is the enemy of individuation. You are not here to become a psychic trash bin for the unconscious. You are here to become a container for truth. A boundary is not a wall, it is a mirror. It says, I see you, but I do not become you. The empath without boundaries is like a mirror that absorbs instead of reflects. Eventually it shatters. I tell you this because I have seen it in dreams, in patients, in history. The mystics who burned out too soon, the healers who died young, the lovers who lost themselves in the agony of others. They were holy, yes, but they were also uninitiated. They mistook sensitivity for wisdom. They mistook suffering for purpose. They died not for God, but for trauma. This must end with you. You who are reading this with trembling recognition, you are not weak for feeling too much. You are simply untaught in the psychic hygiene of the soul. And so your work begins to name. to discern, to unravel the tapestry of feelings that have bound you, and to weave a new cloth, one stitched with your own colors, your own symbols, your own knowing. The individuation process is not a straight path. It is a spiral. You will revisit the same emotional themes, but from higher ground. Each time you will reclaim a little more of yourself. Each time you will shed one more projection. Each time the emotions you carry will become more precise, more authentic, more yours. And one day, yes, one day, you will walk into a room filled with pain and you will not absorb it. You will see it. You will name it. You will stand as a sovereign witness. And in that moment you will know, I am no longer possessed. I am present. Here is a moment in every awakening when the soul must admit a brutal truth. What I thought was love was fear wearing a holy mask. This is especially true for the person who identifies as an empath. So often the one who feels too much is not just sensitive, but scared. Scared of rejection, abandonment, separation, scared to be seen as unkind, scared to say this pain is not mine to carry. And so they absorb and call it compassion. They merge and call it unity. They dissolve their identity into the emotional tides of others and call it Christ-like. But love does not possess, and true empathy does not mean entanglement. It means presence without penetration. Let me speak now of projection, for it is the engine behind emotional possession. When you carry someone else's emotions and believe them to be your own, it is often because you have projected a part of your own unconscious into them, or they have projected theirs into you. The boundary becomes porous. The souls entangle through fantasy and unresolved complexes. You feel their sadness because you have not yet faced your own. Or they see you as their savior because they have not yet faced their inner child. And in this theater of projection, emotion flows like electricity, unconscious to unconscious. The question is not, why do I feel so much? The question is, what does this emotion say about what is unhealed in me? The empath becomes a mirror, but the tragedy is that they often believe the reflection is themselves. This is the shadow of empathy, the secret craving for identity through pain. If I feel your emotions, I must matter to you. If I feel them deeply, I must be spiritually advanced. But in truth, many empaths are not channels of wisdom. They are channels of fusion, trained since childhood to detect danger, anticipate feelings, and preempt abandonment. Childhood emotional enmeshment becomes adult spiritual confusion. You may remember being the one in your family who felt everything. Perhaps you were the emotional barometer, the peacekeeper, the parent to your own parents, the silent absorber of family chaos. In those early years, you learned that to feel was to survive, that to carry pain was to stay safe, that to not feel others was to become invisible, unwanted, unloved. This early fusion creates a wound so deep, it becomes your personality. But your true self, the one beneath the emotional debris, is still intact. It waits, it watches, it whispers through your dreams, your fatigue, your longing to be free. Freedom begins the moment you question, is this mine? This question is a psychic scalpel. It cuts through illusion, it interrupts possession, it names the boundary. When you ask, is this mine? You begin to disentangle your soul from the collective fog. You step back from the edge of fusion. You remember who you are, not what others feel through you. I once wrote, until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate. But let me add, until you make the emotional field conscious, it will dictate your identity and you will call it empathy. This is the spiritual error of our age, the deification of emotional overwhelm. You are told that to be overwhelmed is noble, that to cry endlessly is proof of divinity, that to feel everything is to be awakened. But I tell you now, to feel everything is to be split into 1,000 pieces. You cannot walk the path of wholeness while drowning in the psychic debris of others. To individuate is to gather the pieces. You must learn to differentiate between the authentic emotion of your soul and the foreign emotional code that has been programmed into you by trauma, by lineage, by culture. Your tears are not always holy. Sometimes they are signals of boundary failure. Sometimes they are echoes of someone else's wounds. Sometimes they are the body's final scream after too many years of being hijacked by another person's pain. You were not born to be a sponge. You were born to be a mirror of clarity, a self-aware witness of the inner world, able to stand at the threshold of another's agony without losing your own reflection. And so the work is not to stop feeling, it is to start feeling accurately. You must develop emotional precision. When a wave of sorrow hits you in the middle of the day, you must pause, not drown. You must ask, who is this? What triggered this? Is this memory or presence, past or now? Is this grief mine, or is it a residue I inhaled from the room? This is psychic hygiene. Just as the body must wash itself, so must the soul cleanse its emotional field. This does not mean cutting people off or building walls. It means conscious processing, symbolic thinking, and inner dialogue with the forces at play. If you feel drained after a conversation, do not rush to blame the other. Ask yourself, what archetype did I embody in that moment? Did I become the rescuer, the wounded child, the pleaser, the shadow mother? These are not roles of love, they are roles of fusion. You are not obligated to heal anyone. You are only obligated to become whole yourself. Wholeness is the greatest gift you can offer. The self-possessed being does not absorb the world, they transform it through presence, clarity, and sovereignty. You have likely been praised for your sensitivity, but praise is not the same as purpose. The world may applaud your tears, your exhaustion, your selfless devotion, but if your nervous system is shattered, your purpose is lost. The time has come to reclaim the spiritual dignity of individuation. This is the final path of the empath who no longer wishes to be possessed by what is not theirs, to become not a feeler of the world, but a seer of it. To feel, yes, but through the eyes of wisdom. To walk into pain with rooted feet. To gaze at sorrow without collapsing. To discern the difference between divine compassion and emotional contamination. You will still feel deeply, but your depths will no longer be a liability. It will become an offering. There is something ancient in you that remembers how to be whole. It is older than your trauma, older than your persona, older even than your name. It is the self, the archetype of totality, the central organizing force that longs to unify all your fragments, not by suppressing emotion, but by illuminating its origin. This is the divine root of all inner work, not to escape pain, but to reveal it, to shine a light so radiant that even the most alien feelings return to their source and speak their true names. Let us return now to a familiar but misunderstood terrain, the shadow. I do not mean merely your anger or shame or sexual desire, though these are indeed its emissaries. I mean the living darkness within you, the unconscious repository of everything you rejected to become acceptable, safe, spiritual kind. The shadow is not evil, it is exiled. And anything exiled gains power in the dark. Now consider this: much of what you feel from others is actually your shadow calling to you, projected outward, reflected back. You think you feel someone's sadness, but it is your own grief unacknowledged. You think someone's anger pollutes the room, but it is your own rage, repressed since childhood, now finding a mirror. You say, I'm an empath. I absorb energy, but often it is your unconscious, scanning the field, seeking the lost parts of yourself, encoded in the world like sacred symbols in a dream. In truth, you are not absorbing, you are remembering. Each emotion you pick up might be a symbolic messenger, an echo of something unintegrated yearning to come home. The mistake is to take the emotion literally, to believe it belongs to another. The healing begins when you translate it symbolically, ask what part of you it awakens, what wound it sings, to what dream it reactivates. Emotion is never just about the moment. It is a portal. Every time you are overwhelmed by someone else's feeling, ask yourself, what is this trying to show me about my own psychic field? To walk the path of Jungian individuation is to become fluent in your own emotional mythology. This is not an intellectual practice. It is a mystical one. You begin to dream differently. You begin to feel symbols move through your body like rivers of forgotten meaning. You no longer say this is anxiety, you say this is the archetype of the orphan awakening in my chest. You no longer say I'm just tired after seeing that person. You say my soul encountered the wound that mirrors mine, and I must now return to myself and integrate it with reverence. Integration is not about fixing. It is about inviting. You must invite your own shadow to the table. You must offer hospitality to every part of you that was once too much, too emotional, too intense, too chaotic. Until you do, you will continue to attract those very qualities in others and mistake them as invaders rather than reflections. Correction always seeks resolution. When you carry what is not yours, it is because you have not yet made peace with what is. You see, the empath is often addicted to pain, not because they enjoy suffering, but because suffering gives them a false sense of identity. If I am needed, I am worthy. If I feel what you feel, I belong. If I carry your burden, I have purpose. But purpose built on possession is not purpose. It is martyrdom masquerading as love. You were not born to be a martyr. You were born to become a whole human being, alive in both shadow and light. This path is narrow. It is difficult. It will make you strange to others. You will no longer fit into the mold of the helper, the healer, the emotional savior. People may say you have changed. They may say you've become cold, distant, selfish. But you must remember you are not abandoning them. You are unpossessing yourself. True empathy flows from sovereignty, not fusion. To become sovereign is to reclaim your inner world from the dominion of others' pain. It is to learn how to be with someone suffering without becoming their container. It is to let the emotions pass through you without clinging, without merging, without imprinting on your nervous system like a scar. This is psychic maturation. It is not taught in schools. It is not rewarded in public. But it is the only way to become a vessel strong enough to hold the numinous, the mystical, the divine. In dreams, this often appears as a house flooded with water. Rooms you cannot enter because they are submerged. Hallways soaked in emotion. These are not random nightmares. These are symbolic revelations. Your psyche is showing you that your inner structure, your house of self, has been breached by uncontained feeling. It is time to restore the walls, not to isolate, but to contain, not to block emotion, but to give it structure. Individuation is not the end of empathy. It is its transmutation. When you have reclaimed what was lost in your shadow, when you have dried the flooded basement of your psychic home, you become something rare in this world, a clear mirror, a grounded soul. A person who feels deeply without dissolving. One who can walk through the pain of others and emerge intact, radiant, undistorted. This is not detachment. This is union with self. And through union with self, union with God becomes possible. There is a peculiar way in which the unconscious speaks not through words, but through symbols. And when you keep feeling emotions that you cannot trace to yourself, those inexplicable sorrows, sudden dreads, or waves of longing, you are in fact receiving messages from the symbolic layer of existence. But you were never taught to listen to symbols. You were taught to chase causes. Modern man says, why do I feel this way? What triggered me? Who made me feel this? But the deeper psyche never asks why, it asks, what is this for? You must become symbolic again if you wish to be free. That sadness you caught after seeing a stranger cry on the train. It is not simply an emotional contagion. It may be a threshold symbol summoning a forgotten grief in your own past, a neglected archetype, a dream you never grieved. The human psyche is porous for a reason. It was designed to be relational reflective, not as a sponge to absorb the world, but as a mirror to refine the inner world through sacred encounter. When a person who feels everything comes to me in despair, I do not ask them what's wrong with you. I ask what archetype is knocking at your door, because no powerful emotion enters without mythological significance. You must learn to dream again while awake. You must take your emotional overwhelm and hold it the way the ancients held omens from the sky, curiously, reverently, without immediate interpretation. This feeling is not mine as a start, but it is incomplete. You must follow with, then whose is it, and why has it found me, and more importantly, what part of my soul does this mirror awaken or disturb? Projection is not merely an error. It is a sacred invitation. It is your unconscious using the world to show you what you cannot yet see in yourself. The healer who cannot stop feeling her client's despair may be dealing with an unconscious identification with the archetype of the wounded healer. She has built her persona around helping others, and the unconscious responds by flooding her with their feelings, not to punish her, but to say, "You have not yet tended to your own wound. The projection must break. The myth must be reclaimed." I once saw a man break down weeping over a poem that meant nothing to anyone else. When I asked him what he saw, he could not explain. "It felt like my father's silence," he said. You see, the emotion was not about the poem. It was a symbolic convergence, a hidden doorway to something unresolved. That's how emotion works when it's not yours. It writes in on other people's faces, art, glances, smells, touches, and it opens the wound in you that was waiting for expression. The unconscious has no boundaries. It exists in a field of shared psychic energy. This is why you can walk into a room and feel as though your chest tightens. The air is thick, you say. What is it, really? It is your body's archaic wisdom attuned to signals. That the ego cannot name an unspoken rage between two lovers, a grief hovering like a fog, a betrayal unacknowledged, but present in the archetypal field. You did not make this up, but you also did not just absorb it, you responded to it because something within you resonates with it. Resonance is not possession. It is correspondence between your inner field and the world's psychic song. And like a tuning fork, you can choose whether to keep vibrating or to come back to stillness. But first you must know your own tone. When you do not know your own energetic frequency, your soul's unique emotional fingerprint, you will confuse everything that echoes with your own truth. And then you are lost. Not because you're sensitive, but because you are unanchored. That is the real peril of unconscious empathy. It becomes a substitute for identity. But your empathy is not the problem. Your lack of inner structure is. Build a temple inside yourself, not of stone, but of consciousness. And each time you feel too much, retreat there. Ask the ancient questions. Is this mine? Is this known? What image arises with this feeling? What memory comes unbidden? What part of me have I not yet named? You may be surprised by what answers. Sometimes it will not be a thought, but a dream image, a red bird, a flooded road, an empty cradle. Other times it will be a voice, a whisper from the back of the mind. You still carry your mother's grief. Or, this same is not yours, it belongs to generations. The psyche remembers what the ego forgets, and it returns those memories wrapped in feeling. You are not cursed, you are called. Called to live symbolically again, to honor emotion not as a thing to manage or explain, but as a visitation, a transmission, a movement of soul. And when it is too much, when it threatens to consume you, let that be the sign you have left the symbolic and entered the literal. That is when you must translate, not absorb. To translate is to take emotion and give it meaning beyond its immediate appearance. To do that, you must become an alchemist of the soul. Not to transmute lead into gold, but to transmute sorrow into vision, pain into purpose, overwhelm into myth. You become a mystic, not by seeing angels, but by seeing your sadness as a message from the deep, away from the self, asking you to come closer. And that is the final threshold for many to allow emotion to initiate them. You keep feeling what is not yours because something in you still believes you must suffer to be connected. But true connection begins not through shared suffering, but through shared presence. And you can only be present when you are whole. Wholeness does not mean healed. It means nothing is rejected, all parts are known. And when all is known, you cannot be possessed by others' pain because you carry your own with such reverence that nothing foreign finds a foothold. You become luminous in your groundedness. You become mysterious in your clarity. You become what I call a vessel of the self. A person who can walk through the shadows of the world, feel what is around them, but remain rooted in the radiant stillness of the deep. Do not imagine that individuation is a clean process. It is a series of breakdowns, each one tearing away a false identity. When you feel emotions that are not yours, they often belong to a version of you that was never allowed to speak. The child who repressed rage to keep love, the adolescent who disowned desire to keep order. These fragments live on projecting themselves into others like ghosts asking to be named. It is not that you absorb the emotions of others, it is that you have not yet integrated the ones within yourself. So when you encounter someone's sorrow, it resonates with your own buried sadness. Their grief does not invade you, it activates you. It calls to the grief that was never given language, never held in safety. And in that call, you may mistake their pain for your own because you never truly knew your own. The unconscious does not distinguish sharply between mine and yours. That is the ego's job. But when the ego is underdeveloped or too tightly controlled by the persona, it cannot filter the messages of the deeper world. Then we become overwhelmed, not because the world is too loud, but because we are too porous, too unanchored, too unfamiliar with our own shadow. What you have not accepted in yourself, you will either fight in others or feel overwhelmed by in others. A person who has not owned their anger will find themselves exhausted in the presence of someone. Angry, not because that person is draining them, but because their psyche is screaming, this is the part you buried. You are not being attacked, you are being summoned. You feel what's not yours when your soul is attempting to show you what you still reject. This is why I say do not rush to protect yourself from emotional energy. First examine it. What if it is not a threat, but a teacher? Yes, energetic boundaries are important, but too many seek boundaries as a form of escape. That is not wholeness. That is avoidance dressed as mysticism. The true boundary is not a wall. It is a soul structure built through the slow and painful process of owning all your parts. The moment you accept your own anger, other people's anger no longer consumes you. The moment you face your own helplessness, other people's despair does not drown you. Why? Because the self has made a home for these emotions, a container. And what is contained does not leak. What is held with awareness does not possess. The emotionally porous person is not gifted by default. They are unfinished. Yes, sensitivity is a gift, but not before it is refined. Raw sensitivity is a wound. Honed sensitivity is a blade of insight. So the question is not why do I feel so much? The question is how much of what I feel have I understood, digested, and integrated into symbolic consciousness? The difference between a suffering empath and a mature mystic is integration. The mystic does not merely feel. The mystic knows what the feeling means. The mystic interprets, decodes, transfigures emotion. They no longer say, I feel overwhelmed. They say the archetype of the mother is speaking, or my inner child's longing has awakened, or this sadness is ancestral. It is not a curse, but a thread I must trace. Do you see? To suffer less, you must speak the language of your own soul. That language is not diagnostic. It is not I have anxiety or I am codependent. These are flat categories. The soul does not speak in diagnosis. It speaks in myth, in symbol, in ritual. So instead of I'm anxious, try, there is a serpent coiled in my chest. It moves when I deny truth. That is how the unconscious speaks. And when you speak back in its language, it no longer needs to scream. Every unintegrated part of you becomes louder until you turn and bow to it. Some of you feel sadness in a crowd because the archetype of the orphan lives strong in your unconscious. Others feel rage in stillness because the warrior archetype has been chained too long. These feelings are not interruptions. They are your inner pantheon rising like ancient gods in a temple long forgotten. When they appear, do not rush to cleanse them away with incense and light. Instead, invite them to speak. Ask, who are you? What do you want? What have I forgotten? Sometimes the emotion that is not yours is in fact your truest voice wearing the mask of someone else just to get through the gates of your resistance. And this is why relationships become crucibles. They are not meant to make us happy. They are meant to make us whole. Every time you feel overwhelmed by someone else's feelings, ask yourself, what contract have I made with them in my unconscious? What role do they fulfill in my inner mythology? Perhaps they are your shadow, perhaps your anima. Perhaps they carry the voice of a parent you have not yet confronted. Perhaps they are a vessel for your own unlived life. Do not dismiss their emotions as theirs. Study them. Translate them. Let them reflect something in you. But then, and this is important, you must come back to yourself. You must not drown in their ocean. You must learn to stand on your own symbolic shore, offering your presence not as a sponge, but as a mirror, a chalice, a witness. That is what healing truly is, not fixing others, not absorbing them, but standing fully as yourself in their presence and letting the self in you meet the self in them. This is sacred mirroring. This is the art of emotional transmutation. You no longer say, why do I feel this? You say, what wants to be revealed? You no longer ask, how do I stop feeling this? You ask, how do I make meaning from this visitation? And when you begin living this way, you will no longer fear emotion. You will honor it. You will not say, I am too much. You will say, I am a vessel for myth. You will not say, I feel what's not mine. You will say, the world speaks through me and I choose what I carry. You will no longer be a victim of emotional tides. You will become their interpreter, their alchemist, their mystic. Now I must tell you a secret, but only those with ears to hear will understand the emotion you most resist is the doorway to your individuation. It is no accident that certain energies, fear, shame, lust, sorrow, seem to leak into your being through others. The reason is not merely that you are sensitive, nor that they are toxic. It is that your unconscious is orchestrating a perfect alchemy. Life surrounds you with what you most need to confront in yourself, but are too frightened to seek directly. So the soul chooses mirrors not for flattery, but for revelation. That co-worker whose despair burdens you, perhaps she carries the sadness you were not allowed to express as a child. That friend whose anxiety agitates you, perhaps his panic echoes the terror your inner child had to suppress in silence. That stranger whose energy feels invasive, perhaps he awakens your own denied hunger for attention, touch, presence. These encounters are not curses, they are catalysts. But beware, projection becomes possession when you do not differentiate. To individuate is to hold paradox without collapse. It is to say, yes, I feel this, but no, it is not all mine. It is to feel deeply without fusing, to see clearly without rejecting. This is the sacred task of consciousness, to be a vessel, not a vacuum. You see, emotion is not only psychological, it is archetypal. Each feeling is a visitation from a deeper field, a stirring in the collective sea. When you feel emotions that aren't yours, sometimes they are not personal at all, they are transpersonal. They are echoes from the collective unconscious moving through your vessel because you are the one prepared to interpret them. This is the mystic's burden and the mystic's power. Do you think it was mere empathy that allowed prophets to feel the pain of nations? It was not. It was the soul's tuning to the archetypal field. They were not absorbing, they were listening, and their task was not to wall off the feelings, but to transform them into vision. Likewise, you must ask, what does this emotion want to become in me? A poet, a prayer, a cry, a confrontation, a change. That is your responsibility, not to stop feeling, but to stop drowning in what you have not yet symbolized. Symbol is salvation. When you name the dragon, it loses its power to devour. When you shape the pain into image, art, word, or movement, it becomes manageable, meaningful part of your myth. And make no mistake, you are living a myth, whether you know it or not. Every time you collapse under a feeling that is not yours, you are playing a role in a story written by your unconscious. Perhaps the martyr, perhaps the savior, perhaps the exile. If you do not make this story conscious, you will suffer its fate. But if you awaken within it, you can rewrite the ending. The empath who has become conscious becomes not a sponge, but a seer. The intuitive who has made meaning of their feeling becomes not a victim, but a vessel. And the one who walks through the fire of others' emotions without fleeing, fusing, or fixing becomes the alchemical priest of their own destiny. This is no easy path. It requires ego death. It requires fierce honesty. It requires standing in the center of chaos and saying, I will not collapse, I will not project, I will feel and I will understand. I will speak the tongue of the soul. And this is the deeper truth. You are not here to merely protect yourself. You are here to transform what moves through you. You feel others' emotions not just because you are weak or porous, but because you are called to see what they cannot see. You are thrown into emotional turbulence so that you might bring consciousness to what has remained unconscious. But you must not do this at the cost of your center. You must not lose your own soul in the process of feeling theirs. So when the weight of others presses in return to the sacred questions, where is this emotion in me? What myth is this playing out? What archetype is being invoked? What am I being asked to see, to feel, to become? You are not meant to be a container of pain. You are meant to be a crucible of transformation. You are not here to carry others' feelings forever. You are here to alchemize them into clarity, meaning boundaries and truth. You are here to evolve them through the prism of your own psyche, to give them back to the world, not as wounds, but as wisdom. And in this act, this holy act, you are no longer overwhelmed. You are ordained. And so I invite you to consider that your greatest sensitivity may be your secret initiation. The modern world misunderstands the empath, the intuitive, the one who feels too much. It labels you as fragile, overly emotional, unstable, even broken. But I say to you, you are neither defective nor doomed. You are information. Your soul is in the crucible of psychic transformation. The intensity of what you feel is not pathology, it is prophecy in process. What they call too much is often an archetypal calling misunderstood by an unconscious society. You were not made to fit into a flat world devoid of depth. You were made to dwell in the mystery, to walk among shadows, to listen to what cannot be spoken, and to feel what has not yet been named. You are the dreamer of the collective psyche, the vessel through which the unlived emotions of the world try to find their voice. But listen carefully, you must not become enslaved to this role. The wound of the world will try to seduce you into martyrdom. You will be tempted to believe that your ability to feel the pain of others obliges you to carry it. This is not so. You were not born to bleed endlessly. You were born to transform. The fire in your chest is not punishment. It is the psychic forge. Your body is the instrument that feels where the world is out of tune. Your emotions are the tides that reveal what lies beneath. Your dreams are the riddles of the cosmos whispering through your sleeping soul. But if you do not pause to listen, to shape, to symbolize, you will drown in a flood that was meant to cleanse, not destroy. You ask, why do I feel what isn't mine? And I answer, because something in you is ready to become larger than the self you have known. This is individuation, not becoming perfect, but becoming whole. Not becoming safe, but becoming real. It is the integration of opposites, the uniting of light and shadow, the reconciliation of your soul with the vast mystery it came from. When you feel an emotion that seems alien, trace it not back to the person, but into the archetype. Is it the mother that weeps through you? Is it the warrior who trembles at injustice? Is it the orphan crying for the warmth that no one gave? These are not mere moods. These are beings of the psyche calling you to embody them consciously, not compulsively. And when you do, when you feel fully, speak, truly dream deeply and act soulfully, you become what the ancients called the magus, the wounded healer, the bridge between worlds. This is the destiny of those who carry emotions, not their own, to learn what is theirs, what is the world's, and what belongs to something even greater. The collective soul in evolution. But remember, these boundaries are sacred. You must know where you end and another begins, or else you will blur the lines and call it love. That is not love, that is fusion. And fusion is the death of growth. Real compassion is differentiation held with grace. Real maturity is being able to feel deeply without collapsing. Real power is knowing when to speak and when to hold silence like a chalice. In your dreams, watch for symbols of water, of fire, of thresholds. The unconscious speaks through metaphor. The child you hold in your sleep is the part of you not yet claimed. The storm you flee may be the emotion you still resist. The stranger whose face you cannot see may be your own future self, waiting for you to arrive with your whole being intact. And when you awaken, carry these images into your waking life. Let them shape how you love, how you protect, how you say no and yes. Let them teach you that emotions are not enemies, they are emissaries. They are not weights, they are wings when understood. This is your task, your burden, your blessing. You are not too much, you are just not yet integrated. You are not broken, you are just becoming. And if you can hold the sorrow of the world without thinking, if you can feel the rage of another without retaliating, if you can walk through a room and sense what no one dares to say and still return to yourself, still name your own truth, still draw your sacred line, then you are no longer possessed. You are no longer a vessel of projection. You have become an alchemist of the soul. You have fulfilled the dark truth's invitation to feel what is not yours, and from that mystery to become more than you were. And in doing so, you do not merely survive this strange gift. You transcend it. And that, my friend, is how you finally return, not just to yourself, but to the deep wholeness the soul has longed for across lifetimes. Now go and remember what I have said, not with your ears, but with your being. The work is sacred. The path is yours. The shadow has spoken. The soul awaits. And the world is watching for your return.